Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague, welcoming you back to sit by the fire and listen to some great stories here on Cozy Horror. Today's topic of discussion is more strange objects. So let's get started with a tale about a chair that's set at the end of a bed. Oh, but this chair isn't just for anyone. It's for a very special guest who only comes once you're asleep. So let's delve a little deeper into the chair at the end of the bed.
Mark and I grew up together, meeting in nursery school when we were about 2. We played with the same toys, learned the same games, read the same books, and when we started school, we were both delighted to find that we were in the same class. I didn't really notice the chair at the foot of his bed until we were 6. We were playing Super Nintendo in Mark's room, being rambunctious and probably making a lot of noise. Our game of Mario Kart had turned into a little bit of horseplay, and when I bumped into the old wooden chair at the end of his bed, he jumped up like he'd been scalded. He picked it up, dusting the seat like it might be offended as he placed it carefully back where it had been. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to push your chair over." "That's okay. It's just got to sit there. It's kind of important." "Why is that?" I asked as he reached for his controller to go back to playing the game as if nothing had happened. "Oh, that's where my guardian angel sits at night." He said it in that way that made it very clear this was both something he believed in and was as normal to him as the toast he'd had for breakfast. When he noticed I hadn't picked up my controller to begin playing again, he looked back at me in confusion and seemed surprised by my look of stunned interest. "Your what?" "My guardian angel," he said. "What, you don't have one at the end of your bed every night?" I told him I didn't, and he seemed surprised. "Huh, Mom said everybody had them." He tried to go back to the game again, but I found myself much more interested in this guardian angel thing than our game of Mario Kart. As kids, you get used to hearing your playmates spout out about all kinds of odd things. Sometimes they don't really make sense. This, however, had been endorsed by a grown-up. To a kid barely into his 7th year, the word of an adult was still something I put a lot of stock into. If his mom had told him this, then it had to be true. And if a real angel sat at the end of his bed every night, then I wanted to know more about it, or even see it if I could. "Okay," he said, so when I was little, I woke up and found something at the foot of the bed that scared me. I thought it was a monster at first, but when I went and told my mom about it, she said it was my guardian angel. After that, we left a chair so that it could sit, since before it had just been standing at the foot of the bed. "And it comes every night?" "Every night. And now I'm not afraid of him, since I know that he's there to watch over me." The whole thing interested me greatly. Mark's family didn't strike me as particularly religious. I don't even think he went to church. So the idea of Mark having a guardian angel and not me was a little bit weird. If it was a real thing and Mark wasn't just pulling my leg, I wanted to see it too. That was when I started bothering Mark's mother, my mother, and Mark about having me over for a sleepover. We were getting to that age where sleepovers were pretty common, but it seemed like they just never had a good time to do it. There were always weekend plans. My parents were religious, so we always went to church on Sundays. I started trying for Friday night, or Saturday maybe, but there just always seemed to be something to stop us from spending the night at his house. As if in answer, Mark came to stay at my house a couple of times. That was fun, but it ultimately wasn't what I wanted. We couldn't see Mark's guardian angel at my house after all, so I kept asking and asking if I could stay the night, and finally we found a time that made it work. We were in 2nd grade, a whole 2 years after I started asking, when my parents suddenly needed to go out of town and didn't have a way to bring me with them. It was right in the middle of the school year, and they needed to go to a funeral from Thursday morning to Friday night. It wasn't really the sort of thing you could bring a kid to, and I suggested that maybe I could stay with Mark. My parents liked the idea. We had hosted Mark a few times, so his parents could have a date night or visit relatives. And so they called to see if it was something they could do. Mark's parents said they'd be happy to help, and I was filled with excitement as I packed my bag for a couple of days at Mark's house. Wednesday night was a blast. Mark's dad grilled hamburgers in the backyard while we played on the slip and slide. Mark's mom had rented a game from Blockbuster that we took turns playing. We watched some TV in the living room. His parents said we could stay up a little later than usual, and when his mother said it was time for us to get ready for bed, I felt excited all over again. As I lay on my pallet that night, sleeping in the shadow underneath Mark's bed, I was filled with anticipation as I watched the chair. I'd waited for years to see this, and I wasn't going to sleep until I saw it. The chair just sat there, a mute hunk of wood, and as the lights went out and Mark's last-minute chatter turned into soft snoring, I tried my best to stay awake. I wanted to see it, but as I began to yawn more frequently, I wasn't sure I'd make it. I wondered if Mark really had just been pulling my leg, and as the alarm clock on the nightstand went from 10:30 to 11, I thought it'd be a real joke if there never was an angel, and he'd just been having a laugh at me all these years. As my eyes grew heavy, I tried to keep awake until it got there. Inevitably, though, I lost the fight and fell asleep. I came awake suddenly in the unfamiliar darkness of Mark's bedroom. It was very early, and as I sat up with a start, I remember feeling that momentary sense of confusion. Where was I? What was going on? That was when I remembered that I was at a sleepover at Mark's, and why I was at a sleepover at Mark's. I glanced up at the chair, expecting to see something in white robes with wings and a halo, but I was disappointed in that respect. Disappointed, but utterly terrified. What I saw was a shapeless shadow with vaguely human proportions. The dimensions seemed to move when I watched it, though I don't think it had noticed me. It was leaning forward in the chair, staring at Mark like a hungry shark, and it didn't turn to look at me until I started screaming. It shifted its soupy face towards me, and I saw a pair of dancing red eyes amidst the miasma. It went right on looking at me until someone turned the lights on, and as the room came into view, the creature was just gone. Mark's mother was sympathetic, asking what had happened, and I lied and told her I'd just had a bad dream. She bought it, I think, but I think Mark knew what I had seen. He tried to ask me about it, but I rolled over and faced the wall as I pretended to go back to sleep. Mark tried again as his mom took us to school the next day, but I didn't want to talk about it. I was as terrified of what I had seen as I was disappointed at the outcome of my curiosity. My parents picked me up from school that day, having gotten back a little early, and I think they too sensed that something had happened. I slept more soundly in my own bed than I ever had before, and I never asked to sleep at Mark's house again. I may have never asked to spend the night at his house. But Mark and I remained good friends. I still went over to his house, I still hung out in his bedroom, but I never stayed after dark again. Incidentally, since the sleepover had been such a success, his mother let Mark stay over at our house more often. This seemed to work better for Mark's parents, too, and looking back, I don't think they got along well. They argued a lot, and many of the trips they took together ended abruptly without helping their marriage. When they divorced after Mark graduated high school, I think it was only really a surprise to Mark. They decided to sell the house and split the money, and Mark decided to move out on his own and start his adult life a little earlier than he had expected. So, when he asked if I wanted to be his roommate, it seemed like a no-brainer. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the college Mark was attending, and it was pretty cool. We got on about as well as 2 high school kids moving in for the first time together could. There were arguments about chores, loud parties that probably bothered the neighbors, late-night underage drinking sessions where we told each other all sorts of things, and plenty of general day-to-day life stuff. The things we had meshed well together in our new home, except for one thing he had brought from his old house that stirred up some memories I didn't want to think about. I was helping him move his things out of the back of his dad's F-150 when I caught sight of something that I hadn't thought about in years, though it had played quite often in my nightmares. Picking up a stack of boxes revealed a familiar wooden chair that had sat at the end of Mark's bed for as long as I could remember. It was the chair that the angel had sat in and watched him sleep. I asked him why he had brought it with him, and he looked at me like I was a fool. It's where my guardian angel sits. Duh. Why wouldn't I bring it? I had kind of hoped that the angel was just an at-his-house kind of thing, and the thought that it might be in our apartment at night gave me the creeps. My boss had been asking if I'd be interested in working the night shift for months, and after seeing that chair sat with such care at the end of his bed, I went and told my boss that I was ready to accept. I wanted to live with Mark and help him out, but I just couldn't stand being in that house at night. I could tell that Mark was a little miffed that I wouldn't be at home at night. Night was kind of the only time he wasn't at school or work, but he understood that the bills had to be paid. I don't think he actually understood why I'd taken the night shift. If I was off, I always kept my door locked and slept facing the wall. If the angel ever came into my room, I never knew about it. I certainly never left a chair at the foot of my bed, and I guess if it came to our house, it stayed in Mark's room. Though I guess in the end, it worked in Mark's favor. I was at work one night, playing on my phone and watching cameras, when my phone rang. I saw that it was Mark and figured he was just making sure I was going to be home in the morning before he had to go to school. When I picked up, however, he sounded frantic. Mark was yelling about needing me home right away and how he needed help calling the police. I told him to calm down and just go ahead and call the cops, but he said he couldn't until he cleaned up a little bit. Then he said the most chilling thing I'd heard since we were kids. The angel got him. Got who? I asked, still not sure what was going on. The intruder that broke into our house. I called my boss and told him about the situation, and he agreed to come work for me so that I could get things sorted out. I offered to come back, but he said there was no need. I was probably looking at police reports and other paperwork anyway, but to let him know if I wasn't going to be in tomorrow night so that he could make arrangements. He even said he'd pay me for the night. My boss was a good guy, one of the best bosses I've ever had, and I always appreciated how helpful he was. By the time I got home, Mark was in a tizzy. With good reason, too, since it looked like someone had exploded across his floor. There was blood on the walls, blood on the carpet, blood across the bedspread of Mark's bed, as well as hair, meat, and bones everywhere. The bones were splintered and broken, and everything looked like someone had been fed into a wood chipper. I didn't know what to make of it, but the most striking was the blood splashed across the plain wooden chair that sat placidly amidst the gore. I pulled Mark into the living room and asked him to tell me exactly what had happened. After a few glasses of water and a little scotch, he finally stopped shaking enough to tell me. He said he had heard the guy come in with a key, and he thought it was me. He had rolled over and went back to sleep, already seeing the angel there and feeling safe as he usually did. When he heard rustling in the living room, he thought it was a little odd, but figured I was just settling in for some gaming. When his bedroom door opened, he knew something was amiss. I didn't usually go into his room at night, especially not after what Mark considered bedtime, and the door opening made him turn to confront whoever it was. He had sat up in bed, looking at the person silhouetted in the hall light, and that's when he saw the angel turn its head to look at the intruder. "What the hell?" the guy said, his voice deep and confused. Mark said he had taken a step into the room, fiddling with something in his pocket, but he never got out what he intended to use. Suddenly the angel was standing, and Mark said it just sort of blurred at the guy. He knew how that sounded, but it was like one minute it was standing beside the chair, and the next they had been face to face in the doorway. He had reached out towards him, his hand sinking into the man's chest, and the intruder had made a noise like he was having indigestion. The angel simply pulled him to pieces. He had ripped him right down the middle, long ways, and that had been where most of the blood had come from. He had thrown him against the wall, well, half of him, and the other half he had dragged to the floor and began to eat. Mark said that had been the worst part, watching it eat. It didn't eat like a normal creature. It ate by pressing its formless head against the body. Parts of the body just disappeared. It was like watching something that I couldn't see devour somebody. As it ate, Mark had gotten shakily out of bed and moved slowly around the perimeter of the room. He had watched the thing as he went, unsure whether it would hurt him or not, and when he came to the door, his hands trembled as he reached for the light switch. Just as the lights came on, the creature had looked up in surprise. Its eyes almost looked betrayed, and as he dissipated, Mark was left with the remains of its feast. I don't know what to do. The cops are never going to believe that some weird angel that I've had since I was a kid tore this guy apart. This is a little excessive, even for a home invader, and I'm afraid that I'm going to be in trouble. It's probably going to incriminate both of us for me to put this in here, but we came up with a story that wouldn't sound quite so crazy. The story was that Mark had been in the bathroom when the guy came in. Mark had locked the door and hunkered down to wait on them while they started taking things. While hiding, Mark heard something going on in the bedroom, and when everything had gone quiet, he came out to find the guy like that. It was a shaky story. The cops were likely to raise an eyebrow at it, but Mark isn't a very big guy, and the idea that he might have hidden instead of trying to confront a home invader isn't too far-fetched. No more far-fetched than the idea that he could rip a guy in half. So we called the cops, and after answering some questions and a trip to the station for some more questions, we were put up in a hotel for the night while they checked out our apartment. It turned out that the guy who had come in to rob us was the landlord's nephew. We've had several apartments that had been broken into without much sign of a break-in, and the cops finally had their answer. The nephew has been using the keys from the main office to go into people's houses, and he usually chooses places where no one was likely to be home. I'd met the nephew on the on-site gym a few times, and he knew I worked nights and likely thought my apartment would be empty, not realizing I had a roommate. They found a lot of evidence at the nephew's apartment, an apartment owned by his uncle, too, so the case seemed pretty open and shut. Most of them thought that he'd had an accomplice who was on drugs or something, and the two had just gotten into a brutal exchange over some of the plunder. We actually got a small reward for calling it in, though I think our landlord had mixed feelings about the whole incident. Mark threw the chair out after that. He just didn't feel safe with it at the end of his bed anymore. The angel had been his guardian, and it had protected him, though maybe a little overzealously. It's unclear whether Mark would still be alive if it hadn't been there, but it seemed that, like me, Mark had seen more than he was comfortable with when he'd seen it attack the guy. He put the chair by the dumpster, and somebody must have taken it because it was gone by the next day. I don't know if the angel still comes back to the foot of his bed or not, but if it does, I guess it's standing these days.
Gives the phrase guardian angel a whole new meaning. Coming up next, we have a story about a strange board game that becomes a little too real for those who are playing it. So let's hear a story about the Mystery Man.
I was looking for something to make my end of summer sleepover amazing. What I got was a sleepover that no one would ever forget. Margot, Jenny, and I had been friends for years, since kindergarten even, and we were getting ready to start 7th grade in a few days and wanted to hold our annual slumber party. I had the pigs in a blanket, the chips that Margot liked, the sour gummy worms for Jenny, and a huge bottle of Dr. Fizz for us to share. I was getting the movies ready when I realized I hadn't found our favorite game yet, and started hunting through the closet. We had played Mall Madness, a game my mom had given me from when she was young, and it was a hit at any sleepover. We would shop till we drop, charge it up, and then laugh about who had the best deals and spent the least amount of money. It was great. I had probably replaced the batteries in it a dozen or more times, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I had always put it at the top of my closet, right beside my old Barbie travel case, but today it was nowhere to be found. I blew out in exasperation, wondering where it could be, but ultimately decided to go check the attic. The game had come from the attic after all, so maybe Mom had put it back up there. I pulled down the ladder, glad it was still daylight so it didn't look so spooky up there, and went to go look for Mall Madness. It was kind of a chore because Mom is something of a hoarder. Dad calls her a pack rat, and it seems pretty fitting. She keeps everything. She had clothes from when my sister and I were little. She's got art projects from when she was in school up there. And she had boxes and boxes of old photos and memory books, all kinds of things. I pushed aside a bunch of dresses and found an area dominated by old toys and games that she had saved. It was a mishmash of dolls and books and some old doll houses and a couple of dusty board games. I didn't find Mall Madness, but I found about 7 others. Apples to Apples was for babies, and Uncle Wiggily looked kind of weird. Don't Wake Daddy was missing pieces, some of which I'd lost, and Monopoly was just too long. I was about to give up when I saw a black box at the bottom of the stack that I didn't think I'd ever seen before. It was covered in dust, the letters barely visible, and I pulled it down, tugging it quickly so the other boxes wouldn't fall. I wiped off the cover and read the red lettering on it slowly, the red and black hard to read since it was so faded. Mystery Man, the name proclaimed, and I was about to open it and see the instructions when my mom called and let me know that my friends were here, so I ran downstairs to see them. I tossed the game onto my bed as I ran past, figuring we would check it out later, and we were soon all laughing and jumping as we got excited about the night. We ate dinner, we played hide-and-seek in the backyard, we hung out in my treehouse, and as it started to get dark, we came in to watch movies, play games, and start the rest of the evening's activities. Dad works nights, and Mom didn't really ever make us go to bed when we were having a sleepover. We usually passed out sometime around midnight, but tonight we wanted to stay up till we heard my dad pull in from work. We wanted to see if we could stay up till dawn, just to see if we could, and we had enough snacks and sugar to manage it, we thought. By 11:30, we had watched 2 movies, eaten most of the snacks, and drank half a bottle of soda, as we braided each other's hair during the end part of Balto. We were a little bored with movies, and Jenny asked if we could play Mall Madness for a little bit. That was when I remembered the game, and told them I had something different in mind tonight. The game had worked its way half under my pillow somehow, and when I pulled it out, my friends oohed and awed at it appreciatively. We opened the box and found a black board with silver spaces, the big orange phone in the middle having an honest-to-God spin dial on it. We had cards with descriptions on them, and it felt more like we were assembling a police sketch than a dream date. We would go around the board, landing on spaces and drawing cards, and when someone found a card with a number on it, we would dial the number, and it would help us determine the identity of our mystery man. "So it's a little like Dream Date, then," Margot said. "Seems weird," Jenny said, "like we're hunting him or something." I looked at the instructions, but they gave no particular instruction on the purpose for making a description of the guy. We would take turns until we had assembled our mystery man, and then we would call 000 on the phone and give our description to the person on the other end. Somehow, they would know if it was right or not, and tell us that we had won, or tell us to try again. "Simple enough," I said, and I picked up the dice and rolled first. It was about 4 turns later when Jenny landed on a card that gave her a phone call. She dialed the number, but she was having some trouble until I showed her how the rotary phone worked. Mom had showed me, saying that was how they used to call people 1,000,000 years ago. And once she got the number plugged in, she held the phone against her head and waited for the click. Someone came on after 3 rings, a weird, staticky voice that I didn't much like, and whatever it told Jenny, she didn't seem to like it either. After a few minutes, she put the phone down, her hands shaking a little. "Well, what did it say?" Margot asked. Jenny cleared her throat, trying again to get control. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. The phone man said the call was just for me." She handed me the dice, her hands very sweaty and a little shaky, and we continued. It was my turn to use the phone next, but Margot pulled out a card and laid it down. The card let her steal my phone call, and I laughed a little as I stuck my tongue out at her. She dialed the number and held the phone, interested to hear what was to come. None of us thought it was real. Well, Margot and I didn't, but Jenny scooted a little away as she made her call. The voice picked up, and something quick and harsh made Margot's smile slip off her face as she listened. Her lips trembled as she put the phone down, and she wrote something on a piece of paper and shook her head when I tried to pass her the dice. The guy on the phone said to let you roll again. He said some other stuff, but I'm not supposed to say. I rolled again and grumbled as I landed just shy of a phone space. I wanted to hear what had them so spooked. This was a board game, ages 10 and up and all that, and there was no way it could be that terrifying. We continued taking turns, the girls wanting to keep playing, despite their obvious discomfort. Finally, I got my wish. I drew a card after landing on a spot, and it was a phone booth. Searched the deck for a phone card and dialed the number. I took the first one I found and dialed the number, letting it ring 5 times before someone picked up.
"Mystery man is blonde, about 6 feet tall, and a wide-brimmed hat. That's for your ears only, Toots. So don't tell any of those other little bitches what I said. I'll know."
That was a little weird, and I put the phone down with some hesitation. I didn't think they could say things like that in a board game like this. Margot and Jenny didn't bother to ask what he'd said, and I made notes as Margot took her turn. I had a blonde card and a wide-brimmed hat card, but I didn't have one that said 6 feet tall. I guessed I'd have to draw for it. Meanwhile, Margot had gotten another phone call, and as she listened, I saw her glance over at Jenny, and the look wasn't friendly. I didn't know what the phone guy was telling her, but it seemed to be making her mad. We played the game for hours, and in that time, the game got worse and worse. Anytime Jenny got a phone call, it nearly put her into tears. Anytime Margot got a phone call, it seemed to make her angrier and angrier. I tried to take the phone from Jenny at one point, offering to take the call for her, but she shook her head and told me the phone man had said that she had to take it, whether she liked it or not. "Yeah," Margot said, her eyes looking mean. "She needs to take her calls, just like the rest of us." As the game went on, we got more clues. I learned that my mystery man was a 6-foot-tall blonde in a wide-brimmed hat with a mustache, black pants, and a white shirt. I had most of that, but I was still missing the 6 feet tall with a mustache card. The man on the phone had alluded to the fact that Margot would soon make her move against Jenny, the two being like dogs ready to fight. And when Margot threw down a card, it looked more like a knife toss than a friendly showing. "White glove. I get to take one of your cards, Jenny." Jenny nodded, holding her cards out like a fan, and Margot picked the 4th one, pulling it back smugly before glowering at it. "You switched it," she accused, flipping it around to show Jenny a green sweater card. Jenny shook her head. "Nuh-uh." "Yes, you did," Margot accused. "The phone man said you were a cheater, but I didn't want to believe it at first. Looks like he was right." I never cheated," Jenny said, almost crying. "Then why wasn't this a green scarf card?" The phone guy. But she brought her teeth together hard, and it sounded like wood clacking together. What? I asked. What did he say? Nothing, Margot said. Doesn't matter. Just play the game. Jenny didn't look like she wanted to keep playing the game, but she didn't look like she was capable of stopping either. The game would continue, whether we wanted it to or not. And after that, the phone calls got even weirder. I pulled a card, dialed a number, and was greeted with about 10 seconds of heavy breathing before he spoke.
The mystery man has a long, sharp knife. He's walking down the street. Turn left on Martin Drive. I'll soon be there.
That sent chills through me. Martin Drive was 2 streets away. That was like an easy 20-minute walk. What the heck was this? These weren't pre-recordings. This had to be live, but that was impossible. The game was probably 20 years old at least. It couldn't happen. Look, I said, hanging up the phone, let's just call it a draw. I think this is getting a little too real, and... The orange phone rang, and I felt my words wither in my mouth as we just sat there and looked at it. It was like watching a bomb tick down, none of us wanting to be the one to touch it. It just kept ringing and ringing, and finally, to my surprise, Jenny reached out to pick it up. Her hands shook, her breath coming in quick gasps. She lifted it to her ear, and I heard someone snarl something as she winced like she'd been struck. She held the phone out for me, hands moving like someone with nerve damage, and said it was for me. I took it and held it to my ear and said hello.
Whether you play the game or not, you little bitch, the mystery man is still coming. If none of you wins, then he's coming to get all of you. But if one of you manages to win, then they might be safe. You never know. Better finish what you started.
I hung up the phone, trying to keep my teeth from chattering as I told them what he'd said. That's not true, Margot said. The phone guy told me that I had to beat Jenny, or I'd get taken. He said Jenny was trying to win on purpose so the mystery man would get me. Jenny burst into tears. He said that you two were trying to sacrifice me to the mystery man and that I deserved it. He said I was useless, just holding you two back, and I deserved to get dragged away. I thought about it, weighing what he had said. Sounds like if we all win, then he can't get at any of us. We have to work together to get out of this. Jenny shook her head. He said if I told you what my mystery man looked like, that he'd get me for sure. Me too, Margot said, the anger slowly turning into fear. Well, who cares what he said? He's coming regardless, so we have to do something. So we played the game cooperatively. Helping each other proved a better strategy, and Margot soon had everything for her mystery man. Margot dialed 000 and declared that her mystery man was 5'4" and bald, with a hockey mask and a machete and a white jumpsuit. The voice came from the rotary, making us all jump with its suddenness as it reverberated around the room.
You have discovered your mystery man, Margot. You are safe for now.
We were still for a moment. Then Jenny reluctantly picked up the dice and kept playing. She got a card, dialed the number, and choked out a sob as the man on the phone told her about her mystery man. He's on your street, she said, sobbing a little, and I rolled the dice so we could get to her turn again. White glove, I said. Let me see 'em. Jenny held up her cards, but she started nodding at one that was 5 into the stack. I drew it, and sure enough, it was the mustache. Now all I needed was the 6 foot tall and the knife. Jenny went again, drew a card, and breathed a sigh of relief as she dialed 000. My mystery man is 6 feet tall, dark-haired, with a rope and a long coat. The phone made the sound again before declaring,
Jenny, you have discovered your mystery man. You are safe. For now.
I picked up the dice when I heard something creak the door downstairs. It was long and loud, like a funhouse door at the carnival. I tossed the dice, moved my piece, and drew a card. It was a phone call, and I threw it away and rolled again. I moved, drew, and pumped my fist as I got the 6 foot card. I was rolling again when the phone began to ring. I let it ring, rolling and moving like a madman. I drew, but it wasn't what I needed. I got another phone card and threw it away. I could hear my mystery man on the stairs, moving as slow as any horror movie villain. I drew the gun and cursed as I tossed it away. I drew another white glove card, but I tossed it and kept rolling and moving. I could hear him on the stairs, his boots clumping menacingly. I had to find the knife. I had to banish the mystery man. If I didn't, it would mean my death. He came onto the landing when the ringing phone became too much, and I picked it up and put it down again. It started to ring after a few seconds, and I did it again before moving my piece. I could still hear his boots in the hallway that led to my room, and they grew louder by the second. Jenny and Margot were watching the door to my bedroom like it might explode, but I was focused on the task. Rope, toss. A wide-brimmed hat, toss. He was walking past my little sister's room now. He'd pass Mom and Dad's room after that, and then it would be down to my room at the end of the hall. What would happen if he got to me? Would they even believe Margot and Jenny? Would the mystery man leave them alone once he'd got me? I didn't know, but my heart leapt into my throat. I'd drawn the knife. I was done. I dialed 000 as soon as the door opened to my room. Jenny and Margot gasped, sliding away from the board and as far from the door as they could get. My mystery man has blonde hair, a wide-brimmed hat, is 6 feet tall, has black pants, a white shirt, and a knife. I practically screamed it into the phone, falling forward to cover it as I expected that long, sharp knife to stab into me at any minute. I heard the tone, and then heard the phone crackle again.
That was a close one, Heather. You're safe from your mystery man. For now.
I just lay there for a while, panting and trembling, as Margot and Jenny came to comfort me. They told me they had seen him standing in the doorway, his blonde hair spilling beneath his hat, and a sharp knife in his hand. He had raised it, took a single step, and then just disappeared into nothingness. We lay there, just kind of basking in the feeling of being alive, until I heard my dad pulling into the driveway. We had made it. We stayed up until sunrise, just like we wanted to. I went down and hugged my dad, who seemed surprised that I was still awake, but glad to see me, and then the three of us turned in. I put Mystery Man back in the attic, and have never touched it again. One brush with death was enough for me. So if you find a copy of your own while trolling through the thrift stores and antique malls in your area, be very careful with it. The mystery man you find might not be a mystery for very long.
Makes me think of those old board games like Mystery Date and Mall Madness. Just who could you be talking to on the end of that pretend phone? Gives me an idea for another story, maybe. But until then, let's move right along with a story about A childhood item so benign, you'd never think it could come back to haunt you. Let's hear a story about how my Karmagami was broken.
I envy these kids nowadays. That probably makes me sound like an old fart, but they really do have a lot more options than we did when we were their age. My youngest is neurodivergent, while my oldest has ADHD, which is bad enough to sometimes give him terrible anxiety. We have any number of things around the house to help with said anxiety. Poppets, fidget spinners, fidget cubes, sensory blankets, you name it, and we probably have it somewhere. My youngest son picked them up early, and they seemed to help him cope with the stress that his autism often brought on. My oldest scoffed at the gadgets my son had, but he left them lying around, and my oldest started playing with them too. Now he doesn't go anywhere without his fidget cube, and his hands seem glued to it around test time. All I had when I was his age was a worry stone, and I probably worried away more than a quarry of them. So when my youngest left his Karmagami on the living room floor one afternoon, my first exposure to it wasn't exactly positive. If you're unaware of what those are, they're these little revolving toys that have different patterns on each of the faces. As you rotate it, the picture changes, and the transitioning images are supposed to be soothing. That, however, was not my initial reaction to them. He had left it in the living room floor beside the couch, right in a blind spot. So as I came around the corner one day, wanting to get a little lunch from the kitchen, I stepped down on the pokey end of the toy. After a few minutes of cursing and hopping around, I was ashamed to see that I had broken my son's new favorite sensory toy. I looked at the time and realized I only had about an hour to find a new one before he came home and had a fit. Quick trip to Walmart and $10 bought me an exact copy, but before I could leave, one of them caught my eye. It was a galaxy scene, the stars and nebulas giving me a strange, serene feeling. I decided to buy one for myself, feeling a little silly for wanting a kid's toy, but getting over it pretty quickly. As I sat at my desk and flipped through the scenes of open space, I felt a serenity I hadn't known since I was very young. I have a certain amount of anxiety myself, and the weird rotating thing soothed me when it all became too much. My wife rolled her eyes at me a little, but I noticed she wasn't in any hurry to get rid of her fidget cube either. So it sat on my desk, and there it was well used and well loved. At least, until recently. I've been working on a book for the last couple of years, and it was finally beginning to come together. It was polished. The test readers I'd let have a look at it said they couldn't wait for the next chapter, and I was excited to get the final draft to my editor after so long. As I edited it, the little toy became the object most often at hand. I would turn it over and over without thinking about it, the galaxy spinning as my tale spun itself closer and closer to completion. I was turning it as I worked my way through the last fourth of the book, when something besides the swirl of the heavens caught my eye. I looked down, seeing the corner of the starry sky, and then I saw something on the face that was not the Galileo space probe, or a black hole. It was eyes. I dropped the thing in surprise, but I had definitely seen a pair of bloodshot eyes. I could swear the veins had pulsed a little, the pupils staring at me, and I had been so startled by the intrusion that I picked my feet up into my chair like I thought it might bite me. I reached down after a few seconds of sitting like that, feeling silly, and when I picked it back up, I could see the familiar black hole and space probe among the bed of stars. I shook it off, thinking I'd just been working too hard. Started flipping the little toy in my hand again. As the words began to fall comfortably into place, I forgot about the eyes. I put it off as an optical illusion. It kept spinning and spinning, stopping only to make edits or change something here and there, and I didn't think about it again until later that night. I was talking with my editor on the phone, telling her about my progress and playing with the Karmagami, when it happened again. I figured I've got about 10 more chapters before I'm done with the third draft. I think then I might be ready to pass it to the proofreader, so we can make it ready for publication. The absent-minded flipping was cathartic, my hands busy as my mind whirled over the things I still needed to do. I had to finish the second draft, get the cover art finished, get the final page count, and as I thought about it, my fingers flicked the little toy around and around. The spacescape spun faster and faster, the stars practically winking as I talked to Edith about the upcoming book. I'd forgotten about the eyes, chalking it up to stress, and the little thing hadn't been far from my hands since. "That's great, kid. If they're anything like the last pages you sent me, I can't wait to see them. Did you fix the problem you've been having with the third part?" "Yeah, I think so. I changed it so Mark and Ted move away while he kills Taylor. But the little toy had nearly slipped through my sweaty fingers, and I looked down to see the eyes staring up at me again. They were boring into me, judging me as they glared daggers into my Notre Dame t-shirt. As I watched the eyes, something emerged from the lower lip of the device, and I yelped as something bit me. I dropped the Karmagami and the phone I was talking on, looking down at my bleeding thumb as I shuddered on the couch. My wife and youngest son looked over at me, not sure what had happened, and I heard Edith from the floor asking what was going on. I reached for the phone, but my hands were shaking as the bite on my thumb bled. I apologized for the surprise, but the rest of my answer was a little less excited. When I felt my thumb throb, I looked down to find that the thing was back in my hand. I wanted to drop it, but I just couldn't make my hand release it. The space scene was back again. The eyes and teeth were gone, but my hands shook a little as I flipped through the pictures. I spoke absent-mindedly to Edith, but my eyes kept flicking down to the little puzzle toy. I expected to see the eyes again, but when the call ended, I let the phone slide down to the cushions and took the Karmagami in both hands again. "Boy," my wife said, "you sure are interested in that thing tonight." I nodded, but I felt a little cold as I kept flipping. My fingers felt crampy as I spun the image, unable to stop myself, and it no longer brought me the peace of mind that it once had. This was more like the feeling I used the device to forget, and the longer I held it, the more it made the emotions in me circle like a tornado. I had eyes only for the changing colors and patterns, and as they scrolled, I saw the depths of space open up, and the eyes returned to judge me. They swirled like galaxies all their own, the white orbs climbing up out of the depths of the void. The veins pulsed in the pale pools, beating to the tune of their own phantom heartbeat. I wanted to stop, but I was powerless as I saw that Cheshire Cat's smile oozing up as well. The teeth grinned wetly, drawing up at the corners as they ogled me. The teeth groaned like trees in a high wind, the mouth becoming a rictus as it continued to grow. The closer it came, the faster my hands moved. My fingers cramped, but they still worked as a blurry mechanism, faster and faster, closer and closer, the eyes and mouth rising from the void as my movements seemed to summon them into the world. I couldn't tell if I was leaning in closer or they were getting bigger, but the longer I turned it, the more it encompassed my whole existence. When someone suddenly covered the object in my hand, taking it away from me in one smooth motion, I was both relieved and infuriated. I was in bed, completely unsure of how I'd gotten there, with my wife looking down on me with concern. "I think you've played with your toy enough for one night," she said, taking it over to my desk and setting it down. I smiled at her, a single tear sliding down my face, but inside, I wanted to jump up and throttle her. For the first time in my life, I wanted to hit her. I wanted to slam her head against the desk until she stopped moving, and then I wanted to pick up that toy and start moving the pieces again. I railed against the feelings, but they kept surging forward like eels just below the surface. She must have seen something when she looked back, because she paused before coming back to bed. Her look was strange, almost fearful, but she settled as I adjusted my face into something more normal. "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked, coming to bed as I pulled myself back to reality. "Just working too much lately," I stuttered, getting up as I got into my pajamas. Even as I got ready, I couldn't help but glance at the Karmagami. It was just sitting there, calling to me, begging to be touched, but I turned away as I went to lay next to my wife. The urge to hurt her had passed, and as we settled into bed, I felt like my old self again. I just needed a little distance from my favorite worry stone, and as I drifted off, I made a mental note to just let it sit there tomorrow. I closed my eyes and opened them in a dream void. I was floating naked in space, a long umbilicus sprouting from my navel. I was drifting, moving towards the last thing I expected to find out there. It got bigger the closer I floated, and I expected that it would suddenly burst open and reveal a bright flash of light. Maybe this was where the eyes came drifting from, though I'd certainly never seen it on the stickered background of my fidget toy. The door was massive, roughly 20 feet tall, and it only got bigger the closer I got. As it loomed up before me, I suddenly found myself not wanting to sit in that shadow. I didn't understand how it still had a shadow. Did things have shadows in space? I didn't know, but I didn't want to come anywhere near this thing. As little say as I seemed to have in the matter. It opened suddenly, as I had expected, bathing my eyes in star-dazzling light. As I shaded my eyes to see what was coming through, I saw those glittering teeth as they opened wide and came down loudly around me. I came awake with a deep gasp, finding only my sleeping wife and the dark room. It was still on the desk then, that hateful pyramid, but I don't believe it stayed there long. When I woke up the next morning, my fingers ached, and I was already spinning the galaxies in my hand. My arms were shaking from exertion, the eyes and mouth already growing as they threatened to break the bonds of the Karmagami. I threw it away before I could think better of it, and when it burst against the wall, my wife snorted before falling back asleep. I just sat there for a moment, hands extended, not sure where I'd found the nerve. It was the last thing I had wanted to do, but now that it was star-strewn pieces on the ground, I felt more at peace than I had in days. It couldn't haunt me anymore, couldn't make my fingers cramp, my head ache, but even as I slid back under the covers, I could feel my fingers wanting to work the puzzle yet again. When I woke up and found it sitting on the desk, right where my wife had left it, I almost cried. Over the next few days, the little thing was my obsession, despite my better judgment. If I was awake, the little puzzle was spinning, spinning, spinning in my hands. My pages were forgotten, my family ignored. I couldn't help it. My mind was consumed by nothing so much as freeing whatever was trapped inside this thing, even though I was truly terrified of it. I would come to the precipice, the eyes ready to pop free of the canvas which held them, only to drop it before the snapping teeth could bite me. I would resist its pull for a few minutes, an hour at the most, but then I'd come to and find it in my hand yet again. My wife stopped nagging me about it after the second day, just sighing disgustedly any time she saw me fiddling with it. At some point, she left to take the kids to school, and they didn't come back. I was aware of them the same way I was aware that every 8 hours I needed to eat, but I don't think it truly registered as something to be worried about. The phone was ignored, sometimes my body functions as well, and before long I was simply sitting on the living room floor in my own filth, my fingers rustling the drapes a little, as they worked the picture at an eye-watering pace. I'm in one of my little breaks now, the device thrown against the wall as I try to resist the urge to use it. I took the time to get this down, hoping it would find someone, anyone, who might be having a similar problem. Sometimes the things that bring us joy are also the thing that destroys us. I don't know what sort of otherworldly being resides in this hunk of plastic and adhesive pictures, but it gets closer and closer to being born every time I pick the Karmagami up. For your own sake, if you ever see the eyes, don't fall into the same trap that has me. If you see the eyes, throw it away and forget it by any means possible.
So many cursed childhood items. Why do childhood items always seem to be the portal to the land of Nar, to the places we'd rather not go, to the things we'd rather not see? Bad luck, I suppose. Moving on, let's hear a story about something we take for granted, something that's always in the bottom of our bags whenever we order a little Chinese takeout. Maybe something we don't really think about until the things we read inside it are a little ominous. Let's hear a story about someone who's fortunate.
I looked at the sign over the register and scoffed loudly. It hung above the bowl of fortune cookies like a silent guardian, and it had never made any sense to me. Customers are cautioned to take one fortune cookie. Taking more than one cookie may be hazardous to the customer's health and sanity. Management. I'd been coming to Yinshi Guzo for the last 10 years, and that sign had always sort of made me roll my eyes. The food this place made was well worth the 5-minute walk from my house, and I had never gotten sick here as I had at other Chinese restaurants. The food was great, the price was fair, and the customer service was second to none. Yinshi Guzo was a place I came to when I was depressed. It was the place I came to when I was celebrating, or when I just needed some comfort food at the end of a long day. It was my all-time favorite restaurant, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather eat. I had actually met my wife here 5 years ago, in fact. Her date stood her up, and I was coming in for some takeout. We both sat in the waiting area, her hoping for a table, since the place was bustling, and me just waiting for my takeout, and struck up a conversation. By the time my food came, she had asked me to stay and eat with her, and I agreed. A year later, we were married, and we've been together ever since, and coming back to Yinshi Guzo as well. I was here again on a Friday night, date night for me and Lisa, waiting for our usual. Sesame chicken with pork fried rice for her, General Tso with white rice for me, and an egg roll each. It was crowded. Yinshi Guzo was always crowded. As I stood before the counter, the sign irked me as I saw it again. Probably because the cookies here were my all-time favorite part of the meal. The owner is a world-class pastry chef, as well as a great cook. He makes the cakes for the shop, and his fried cheesecake is to die for. I think his fortune cookies, though, are the best I've ever had. I know that some of you are going to tell me that fortune cookies aren't an authentic Asian delicacy, but this guy has embraced them at Yinshi Guzo. He makes them from scratch, putting the fortunes in himself, and they're so buttery and delicious that I could eat them by the ton. He refuses to sell them, though, saying that they're only meant to be enjoyed one at a time, and I can't imagine how much money he loses making them like that. Wrapped delicately in their paper holders, they mocked me from the bowl as I stood looking. Leaning forward, I grabbed about 6 of them and popped them into my pocket. I couldn't tell you why I did it, not really, but it was something that I would come to regret. "Your order, sir," said the voice of Miss Kim as she came back. I jumped, looking guiltily as I smiled and thanked her for the food. As I turned to go, I heard her say something almost too low to hear. "Be careful with those. Remember the rules, sir." I turned back, but she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front from the back already. I shook it off. I must have misheard her, I thought to myself, as I took my food and left. I traversed the street, weaving between couples and clumps of people on their way downtown, as I made my way home. As I walked, I felt the cookies shuffling around in my pocket and decided to have one. I reached in and pulled out the hand-wrapped paper cover, looking at the little message scrawled on the outside. Good Fortune had been written on it, and I opened the wrapper and picked the fortune out as I ate the delicious cookie in a single bite. It was still soft and warm, and the cookie tasted fresh from the oven. They always seemed to taste like that, and I assumed he made them fresh every day. I looked down at the little paper and thought for a moment that it might have been handwritten, too. Did the owner handwrite his fortunes or something? That level of detail really made these all the more special. I smiled as I read the fortune. Even if it was handwritten, it was still kind of generic for a fortune cookie. Tumultuous times are right around the corner. Aren't they always, I said to myself, putting my key into the lock as I stepped inside. 10 minutes later, I had the wine chilling in the sink, the food transferred to plates, and I'd found the perfect movie on Netflix for us to cuddle up and watch together. I had it all arranged and ready for her. As I switched over to regular TV, the movie primed and ready to play, I looked at my watch and tisked. It was already 8:30. She should have been here by now. She had been working late these past few days, and I was beginning to become worried. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another of the delicious little cookies. I stopped before unwrapping this one, reading the handwritten message on the outside before I opened it. 1 per visit. Don't forget the rules. I felt my brow furrow a little. That was weird. What an odd thing to write on the wrapping of a cookie. I shrugged and pulled it out of its wrapper, pulling the fortune out as I ate the cookie. This one was good, but not as good as they usually were. It was buttery, but a little dry. Tasted like a leftover from yesterday's batch. A sports center came on. I looked at the scrap of paper inside and blew air out in a little chuckle. A loved one is thinking of you. Another classic. My phone rang about that time, and I picked it up, looking at the picture displayed on the home screen. Lisa's smiling face decorated the screen, and I smiled to myself as I picked it up. Hey, honey, you almost here? I got everything ready for date night. Her breathing on the other end was heavy, and it took her a minute to compose herself. Babe, I need to tell you something. I need you to not interrupt me, okay? That made me nervous. Lisa sounded panicked, and I didn't like the thought of her driving while she was in that state. I could hear the sound of her engine in the background, and it sounded like she was driving very fast. I looked at the clock and realized it was later than I thought. Traffic could be nuts this time of night, and I wish she would pull over. Are you okay? You sound like you're... Just listen, and don't interrupt, okay? Okay, I said, hoping this would calm her down a little bit. I took out another one of the cookies as she prepared to speak and unwrapped it absent-mindedly, taking the fortune out with a deft hand. I'm pregnant, she said quickly, in a way that made me think she was expecting me to be upset. Quite the contrary. We had been trying to have a baby for years, but couldn't seem to make it stick. We thought we'd finally made it work a few months ago, but she had ended up miscarrying, and it had hit her really hard. She had really fallen into work, staying late and working on her off days, and these date nights had become our only real time to be together. The news that she was having a baby made me ecstatic. I was confused as to why she was so upset. The cookie was dry as I crunched on it. This one was definitely stale. That's wonderful, dear, I said, through a mouthful of cookie. I'm so happy you... It's not yours, she exclaimed, and the cookie turned to ash in my mouth. I felt it stick in my throat, a dry paste turning to cement, and I hacked it up and spat it on the carpet. It looked a little off as it sat in the congealing mass there, but my mind was not on the cookie. Not mine. How could that be? I've been having an affair for the last 3 months. When we lost Davin, I couldn't get over the depression. Someone at work had been flirting with me for a while, and one night oh God, babe, I don't know what to do. She was crying, and I could already hear it turning jagged and ugly. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be furious, but I couldn't in the face of her sobbing. Come home. We'll work this out, Lisa. We can... Huh? She huffed out, and I heard a loud pop of static before the line went dead. Hello? Hello? Lisa, are you there? Hello? But there was no one. I sat forward, bumping the table and sending the plates I had made spilling onto the ground. I heard the dry snap of the other 2 cookies as they crumbled in my pocket, but I hardly noticed. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, becoming more frantic with each phone call until I finally bounced it off the carpet floor in a rage. What the hell was going on? What had happened to Lisa? I felt something papery against my palm, and when I looked up, I saw the fortune was plastered against it. I caught sight of the words, and it quelled my rage with cold fear. Your joy will quickly become ashes in your mouth. What the hell was that? That wasn't a normal fortune. Fortunes from cookies were almost always benign, or at least neutral. Did the owner write these himself? Who the hell would put a thing like that in a cookie? I stared at it for a few minutes before retrieving my phone and trying to call her back. The screen was cracked, but that hardly seemed to matter anymore. As my phone remained silent and hers remained unreachable, I was becoming scared. What if something had happened? The fortune continued to nag at me. So far, each of them had been accurate in their own way. What the heck was going on here? This was too elaborate for a prank, and if it was, it really wasn't amusing. I had started to clean up the food I had spilled when the phone finally began to ring. I grabbed it up and prayed that it would be her face I'd see on the screen. Instead, it was a blocked number. It looked odd through the star pattern of my broken glass, and I sat it down. I could once again feel the broken cookies poking at me from my pocket. I reached in and threw both of them on the table. One of them had come unwrapped, and the fortune stuck to my finger as my hand came free. My curious mind would not allow me to ignore it, though. But now I wished I had. You will receive 2 phone calls. Both will bring you only sorrow. I caught the still ringing phone on the 4th ring. Hello? Lisa? I asked hopefully. Hello. Are you the emergency contact for Miss Lisa Callahan? I am, I answered, unsure of what it wanted. This is Officer Winsman. I'm afraid there's been an accident. Is my wife okay? I asked, still a little hopeful. The officer was silent for a few seconds. I'm gonna need you to come down to St. Mark's and identify her remains. The phone slipped out of my hand again, and I could hear the officer saying hello from the carpet. The last cookie sat on the table, ominous in its white paper holder. The edges of the paper were black, whatever was inside having seeped into it. The covering bore a legend that made my breath hitch, and though I felt my hands reach to open it, I wanted nothing so much as to throw it out the window unread. The black letter on the front read, "Those who do not follow the rules are doomed to live with the consequences." My shaking fingers found the white paper just as the phone went silent. I've been lying on the floor of my apartment, smelling the aroma of old Chinese food for the last 3 hours. I don't know what to do. Someone came to knock on my door, but I ignored them. They said they were with the police, but I don't care. Lisa is lost to me, and I fear that may not be the end. I'm almost glad that it may not be the end. The world outside has quieted some as the night stretches on, and I continue to lay on the carpet in the fetal position, using what may be my last few hours to write this message. The black stuff that poured out of that wrapper, bits of moldy cookie floating amongst it, was nothing next to the message that oozed onto the surface. Your end will not be so quick as hers, it said. So if you read this, and you should see that sign telling you only to take 1 cookie, remember that the rules are there for a reason, and those who do not obey them may be forced to live with the consequences.
One more story for you, and I think I've got something pretty good to finish us up today. It's a story about an odd item you may have never seen, something plunged into the depths of the ocean that we sometimes forget about until it's time to belly up at the Red Lobster. So let's hear a little story about lobster pots.
My Uncle Gary is a lobsterman off the coast of Maine. Such work is pretty noble for a native of Maine, but the story isn't really about catching lobsters. It's about what Uncle Gary caught and how it haunted him. Uncle Gary likes to drink beer at the Rusty Spoke after a long day of working on the water. He can be found there most any night, having a beer and talking about his catch. Uncle Gary is also fond of what people call fish stories. If you caught a 2-pound lobster, then Uncle Gary caught a 5-pound lobster. If you caught a swordfish, Uncle Gary caught a hammerhead. If you caught a tuna, then Uncle Gary caught a whale. You see where I'm going with this. My brother and my dad and I also work as fishermen, though we're out catching halibut and mackerel instead of lobster. Dad likes to say that Uncle Gary usually goes down to the Spoke because otherwise he'd have to go home to his wife, and those of us who knew Aunt Sheila understood why nobody wants to do that. Uncle Gary had been having a pretty good month, it seemed. He's been buying rounds for people. He's been fixing up his house, and I'm pretty sure I saw a new boat out in the harbor. I don't know where he's fishing at, but the wharf master says he's been bringing in a lot of lobster lately. Big ones, too. Numbers that the local guys who track these kinds of things are scratching their heads at. He's been in a great mood, but that mood, it seems, was about to change. We came in today and found Uncle Gary already nursing a pint. We all just shook our heads as we saw him, saying that he must have had another story to tell us. We'd had a good day of fishing, but the second we told him, I was sure that Uncle Gary would claim he'd had a better one. I don't know, though. Something about the way he was looking at that pint should have clued me in, but I took a seat next to him and jokingly asked if he'd caught a mermaid or the lost treasure of Atlantis or something before ordering a drink of my own. Uncle Gary turned to look at me, and when he did, I wished to Christ he hadn't. Poor guy looked like 5 miles of bad ocean, and I was suddenly a little afraid to let him drive home. I caught a lobster, he said, though he didn't sound like he was overly proud of it. A lobster? Dad said. Just one? You sure it wasn't like the Loch Ness Monster or a whale or... But when Uncle Gary turned to look at him, Dad stopped talking. Uncle Gary looked haunted, like whatever he had pulled out of the ocean was right out of H.P. Lovecraft or something. I pulled up a lobster that I shouldn't have, he said. I pulled him up a couple of weeks ago, and he's the only lobster I've caught since. As he spoke, I thought I actually remembered this lobster he was talking about. Uncle Gary had come in 2 weeks ago, talking about how we had found this weird lobster in his trap off a Crack Claw Point. He was huge, his shell all black, his little eyes were red as coals, he told us over beers. He said that he had hauled him up, and one look at him was enough to tell him that he couldn't eat him. This was a rare sort of lobster, the kind you only see once in a lifetime, and he was going to throw him back and keep the story as his only trophy. We'd all scoffed and thought Gary was losing his mind. Who throws back a lobster like that? If you keep catching him, then why don't you sell him or something? My brother asked as he pulled his own pint and started drinking. Well, something I left out of the story when I told you fellas, Uncle Gary said as he tore up the coaster that his beer had been on. First time I caught that lobster, he talked to me. We laughed, thinking Uncle Gary was making a joke. But I couldn't. One look at the old guy was enough to tell me that he was absolutely serious. He was just as silent as the grave and twice as serious as he sat there, making little piles out of the coaster and staring at his beer. Let me get this straight, my dad said. You pulled up a solid black lobster that talks out of the ocean, and you, what, just let him go? Uncle Gary nodded. That's all it took to send them laughing again. Couldn't blame them. This was a little different, but it was the same old Uncle Gary game. He was going to come out and tell us some fish story that there was no way was true, and we were going to laugh and say, sure, Uncle Gary, sure, like we always did. From my seat, though, I could see how haunted he was, and I wasn't laughing. He was the biggest lobster I ever caught. As I pulled up the lobster pot, I thought I had caught 3 or 4 regular-sized lobsters. The thing weighed about 30 pounds. And the claws on it looked like it could have taken the cage apart if he wanted to. He didn't move, though. He didn't make a noise. He just sat there and looked at me with his little beady lobster eyes that were the color of blood. I was already counting the money I was gonna get for him at the market when all of a sudden he spoke. He spoke in a deep voice like something out of the pits of hell. I could hear it in my mind instead of my ears.
said if I threw him back, he'd grant me my heart's desire. I was speechless. You only hear about things like that in kids' stories, but I was excited, too. You read about this, but you never think anything like it's going to happen to you. He asked me if I wanted something. After a little bit of thought, I smiled as I came up with what I believed was the best wish. Oh? What'd you wish for? A new bass boat, a condo down in Miami, lifetime supply of mackerel? My dad asked. He and my brother were laughing again like it was the biggest joke ever. I told him that every time I put my lobster pot in the water, I wanted to catch him. I wanted to catch him again and again and get his wish over and over again. Smart, my brother said. Like telling a genie you want infinite wishes or something. That's what I thought too, but turned out I really hadn't thought it through very well at all. I spent the next 2 weeks pulling him up again and again. And every time I would wish for something different. I'd wish for 100 grand in my bank account. I'd wish for a brand new lobster boat. I'd wish for 100 lobsters, each of them 20 pounds, and each time he would grant it for me. The old guy really seemed to like coming up again and again. After a while, I started to think he looked forward to our daily routine. Sounds pretty good, my brother told me. So why is it a bad thing? Well, the other day I yanked him up and was getting ready to make my wish when my cell phone rang. I usually can't get service out there. Leave it to your aunt to know exactly how to get a hold of me when she wants me. It was her, all right. She was mad. She started yelling, really laying into me. Guess I forgot to do something before I went out that day, and she let me know about it. She told me I was worthless, that I couldn't do anything right, and that all I was good for was catching lobsters because I'd never been good for much else, and she couldn't remember why she married me in the first place. I sat there listening to her, and my luck had been so good that maybe I just didn't think about what I was doing. I looked her dead in the phone and said, I wish she would shut the hell up and get the fuck away from me. Well, she stopped talking pretty quick. Thought maybe I'd lost her. Then I looked down, and sure enough, she was still on the phone with me. Couldn't understand what had happened, and then I looked over at the lobster and realized what I had done. He was looking down at his beer, and I didn't think I'd ever seen him look so distraught. It was like something had been ripped away from him, something deep down in his soul, and without it, he was just sort of empty. I'd wished your Aunt Sheila away, and I was horrified. Then I thought, hey, no problem. I'll just have the lobster bring her back again. I threw him back in and pulled him back up again, telling him I wanted your Aunt Sheila back, but he just sat there and looked at me like I was an idiot or something. I threw him back in and pulled him up again, but he still wouldn't bring her back. I was crying by that time. I brought him up for a 5th time, but no matter how many times I put him down and brought him up again, he never brought her back. We were all a little speechless by then. But Dad still must have thought this was the punchline he'd been waiting for. Boy, did you luck out. Sheila's a real ballbuster. Seems like you got a little piece and still got a magic lobster. My Uncle Gary turned and looked at him. It was the closest I think I've ever seen him to putting his hands on my dad. That ain't funny, Bruce. I know what you guys think about my wife. I know you think she's a harridan and a ballbuster, and I'd be better off without her. But in truth, a woman's the most precious thing to me I've ever had. I don't always like the way she talks to me, but I love that woman more than anything. I'd sooner trade places with that lobster than try to live without her. We all just sat there quietly for a little while, looking at our beers and weighing what Uncle Gary had said. It's pretty terrible when you thought about it. Clearly, he was taking it pretty hard. We didn't see my uncle for a couple of days, and Dad said he wasn't answering his phone either. We were worried that maybe he'd hurt himself, but when he appeared back in the spoke one night, we all breathed a sigh of relief. He'd probably just been out on a long voyage, something that all of us were guilty of from time to time. We went to sit with him and offered to buy him a drink, and our relief lasted until he started talking. I wonder what it's like to be one of those lobsters. All three of us turned to stare at him, not quite sure what he was getting at. What, like the ones we catch? I've been talking with that black bastard that I keep pulling up in the lobster trap. He says it's nice down there, and that he's been down there for an eternity. No way. The oldest lobster that's ever been found was 150 years old at the best. My uncle turned and looked at me as if I were the biggest fool he'd ever laid eyes on. That's because some of them don't get caught, kid. They live down there in the deeps for thousands of years. Some of them go their whole lives without ever seeing a human being. They love it down there. It's their home. They guard it jealously. They live and live and live. And they're at peace down there, where nobody bothers them. I wonder sometimes what it must be like to have peace like that. I wonder what it's like to live that carefree. When was the last time we ever saw my uncle? A couple of days later, they found his boat out on the water with nobody in it. They say it's like he just abandoned it and jumped off into the water to see what he could find out there. After the conversation I'd had with him, I think that might be just what he did. One more thing they found, and it makes me think his story might have actually been true. They said they found a lobster pot out there on his boat with the biggest dead lobster anyone had ever seen inside. They said the sucker was massive, easily 50 pounds of rotten lobster meat, and he was still in that trap that my uncle had hauled him up in. I sure hope my uncle made it to the water when he made his last wish, because I think he went to see the place that the lobsters talk about. I think he went to find his peace in the depths of the ocean, where no one will ever find him again.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't be too sad. I'm sure I'll be back very soon with more tales to terrify here on Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.